Hey, Black mothers and others. Thank you for joining me for the Free Black Motherhood podcast. Free Black Motherhood is a social movement that wants to accompany Black mothers in their journey to owning their agency. We do this by offering educational spaces, tools, and most importantly, community. Here in the space of Free Black Motherhood, we have a vision for the world. That vision is that Black mothers have the resources and tools to remain present and grounded within ourselves despite the complexities of raising children in today's world. We also believe that we deserve the same freedom and healing that we want for our children. This space is ran by me, Ambreia Meadows-Fernandez, a speaker, writer, facilitator, and community organizer, and of course, a mother of 2 kids. I can't wait to see the conversations and exchanges we'll have. Without further ado, let's get into it. Hey y'all, on this episode, I had the lovely opportunity to connect with Dr. Candice Nicole Hargons. Dr. Hargons is an award-winning psychologist and associate professor at Emory University's Rollins School of Public Health, where she studies sexual wellness and liberation. With over 80 published articles, Dr. Hargons has made substantial contributions to the field, positioning her as one of the leading experts in her discipline. Her innovative work has been widely recognized and featured in major publications and podcasts such as the Huffington Post, Essence, Ebony, Wall Street Journal, Women's Health, Blavity, Cosmopolitan, and the New York Times. As a thought leader, Dr. Hargons continues to shape the conversation around sexual and mental health, advocating for liberation and wellness within marginalized communities. She is also the author of the book, Good Sex: Stories, Science, and Strategies for Sexual Liberation, that was published by Row House in February of 2025. Right now, I am sitting with the lovely Dr. Candice Nicole Hargons. Thank you so much for being with me, Dr. Candice.
Thank you for having me again.
And there are just so many wonderful directions this conversation can go, low key and high key. I kind of feel like it might end up having to be a two-parter. I can already kind of see that happening because I'm just so excited. But the first question that I have for you is kind of a grounding question in what a sexology is as a concept and what is a sexologist. I think a lot of folks don't know.
So it's a person who studies sex for a living. Some people are researchers in public health or psychology, like me, but some people are more on the education side. So they do a lot of reading of popular media or cultural critiques about sex. But anybody who's interested in, curious about like the history or the expression of or the practice of sex, they can be considered a sexologist.
That's really cool. And so, as you may or may not know, Free Black Motherhood is a liberatory mothering framework, right? And so, we're looking for all of these ways to break away from these expectations and binaries and standards. And so, another question I have for you is, what role do sexologists play in the liberation of Black folks generally, but Black mothers specifically?
I think this one is so deep, and I feel like this is where we're about to go in because there's so many components of Black motherhood that have been scrutinized, and sex is cornerstone to it. Like people survey our sexual practices to establish whether or not we're good enough mothers or worthy of being mothers. They survey how our kids came to be, how many kids are birthed and fathered by how many men. There's so many like elements of surveillance on Black women who have mothered around sexuality. And we saw this in the media with people like Kiki Palmer and like, what do you get to wear? And do you get to feel or look sexy to other people if you're a mother? Do you get to, how do you embrace your own body as a sexual being and as a human being after, during, and before motherhood? How do you teach your kids about what sex is in developmentally appropriate ways? And how do you avoid policing your children on their sexuality so as to preserve your own reputation, like as a mother? Like there's so many layers to it. So being a mom of a 1 and a 6-year-old, I'm really thinking about it in so many different ways.
I connect with that in so like you said, and there are just so many possibilities and so many routes for how that can go. And I'm even thinking with those comments in mind, I'm even thinking around how for so long we were like portals to like other people's birth, and our motherhood was removed completely. And so we experienced sexual violence that was divorced of motherhood, divorced of consent, divorced of pleasure, and just thinking about how to even have this conversation
Mhm.
around Black motherhood, not just motherhood generally, not just sex generally, but
Mm-mm.
Black motherhood and sex. We are going into, a really interesting territory.
Yeah.
So one of the things that has really enamored me about watching you and your journey is, and at this point, I can't remember if I heard you say it at the book launch or on Instagram or in the book because I'm just, I'm tapped in so many different ways. Is you speak about being a farm or fast girl, right?
Mhm.
And there are so many of us that have either had that label thrown at us or have owned it or have all of these different relationships to that term. And I have so many like residual feelings that I'm still processing around like the life that I was living when I was a teen and all of these other kind of things. And so this is going to be a two-parter. So the first part of it is thank you for being so vocal about that journey because we don't have a lot of places to witness that conversation take place. The second piece is I think it was at your book launch. I remember you kind of saying that one of the really defining moments of your experience is like, yes, you were like into having like consensual sex and all of these other kind of things. And there were Black women who gathered you and were like, hey, this isn't a bad thing. And also, you can be all of these things, kind of like directing you to find balance and kind of interweave that. Can you talk to us just about that journey, about that moment where you were embraced and held as opposed to shamed and just everything?
So I like to start with what it means to be a girl who was fast as self defined and not somebody imposing it on me, right? Because I certainly got it imposed on me, but I use it as a self defined term because it's defined in two ways for me. Someone who was sexually precocious, meaning that I was curious very early on about my own sexual development and expression. And I wanted information about that. I wanted to see what it was like. I wanted to know more. And it wasn't a result of, for some women, it might be a result of, trauma or being exposed to things in a way that was not consensual. For me, it really was an innate sense of curiosity. And
Hmm.
I think that we undersell how common that is. And so we mask it and we don't talk about it because people don't think that girls who are fast end up really successful in a lot of ways like I did. Now, I think it's important to name that so that there's not this narrative. If you fast, you're gonna do this, 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 and be terrible for the rest of your life,
Yeah.
everything else. Right. And the second part of it is moving quickly through sexual experiences, having a number of them. Like, so my pace in life in most things is fast, not
Hmm.
sex. It would just translate it to my sexual life and sexual experiences. And I would say that the person who I felt embraced by was my aunt Tanya, rest in peace. She was like 15 years older than me or so. So she was a teenager when I was born. And I think our proximity in age, but also her own hot girlness and fast girlness were like emerging and showing up as I was coming of age. So I got to just, get my hair braided and listen to her stories and pretend I was asleep and ear hustle. But when it came my time to be like curious about boys or, like developing physically, she's the person who bought me my bras. She's the person who took me to the club and, she wasn't trying to get me to drink or anything. She just let me dance and have a good time and twerk on somebody, like, and just was just cheering me on the whole time and never felt like that took away from my brilliance. Never thought
Hmm.
that it took away from how people would see her or see the women around me as not better managing my sexuality. Because I think that's what a lot of it comes down to when Black elders label Black girls fast. They know it's reflecting their parenting basically. And so I wouldn't say that all of the women in my life embraced that, but she did. And for me, that made a big difference.
I really feel myself. This is so cheesy. I don't know why I introduced my emotions as cheesy. I need to stop that. But that's a conversation for another time. This is going to sound like really cheesy, but I'm just like tearing up listening to this because the question that's coming up in my head is like, what would it look like for all of us, but Black girls in specific, to be embraced as we experience our identities, our sexual curiosity, all of that? Like, what if all of us just had a
Yeah.
safe container to just play, you know? And I
Mhm.
just think about how all of us would be so different. Even when we first started chatting and we were talking about like clothes and things like that as a element of fastness. So before we did this interview, I was at the pool, and so I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna just grab something easy." And so I have like this very like loose spaghetti top and like a one piece. And at first, I was not like I was like, "Okay, how do I find the most stressful route to get it done?" Because I can't be seen like this at the library. I don't have on a bra, like it's a one
Mhm.
piece, like things moving around. And then I realized, first off, I'm interviewing a sexologist. So if anybody understands,
Yeah.
that person is going to understand. And also, I just kind of had to call into question it, like, why, like, what was the journey to me accepting that I was any less valid because
Yeah.
came to the library and had like my body moving freely in a one piece?
Mm.
How does how does that reduce my value, you know? And so
Yes.
I decided to come up here. And so,
'Cause I feel you. I hate bras, so I really
yeah, I
only
know.
just for, like, if I want a certain look, like, if I feel like I want an extra lift for whatever reason, but I just stopped because I was like, "And where who? Y'all gonna have to get over these nipples." Like, okay.
Yes. Yes, so much. And another conversation for another time is how mad I be when I see men running with no shirts on. And like whoever that person was that decided men didn't have to wear shirts and women do, like, it's so stupid. It's
Yeah,
so
it
stupid.
is.
It is so stupid. But kind of as a somewhat, it might be jarring, but it's important as a shift for us. One of the things that I have read you talk about in your book and seen you speak about in other platforms is this idea of the sexual response system.
Mm, mhm.
And I'm really curious to if you can just let us know generally an accessible way of what it is and how it might be impacted by the social and household expectations we experience in mothering every day.
Yes. Okay. So there's a couple ways to name that because there are a few different models for the sexual response system. But basically, when I'm thinking about it, it's your sexual functioning. So it includes things like your desire, which means you're wanting sex, your arousal, which means like your body's preparedness to have a good sexual experience, your satisfaction, your pleasure, orgasm. All of these things are a part of your sexual response cycle. But what most people talk about is desire. Some people use the word libido, some people use the word desire, but it's like, do I want sex? And I like the work of Emily Nagoski around
Mhm.
this because she talks about, are you getting sex worth having? So when I think about the things that get in the way of our sex lives, just because we've got like full time careers and businesses and parenting responsibilities, caregiving, for some of us, spousal responsibilities in caregiving or receiving, all of these things can sometimes be barriers to experiencing sexual desire for a lot of women. I come back to with everything that's going on in our lives that make us so busy. Before you try to deal with any of those, is the sex you're having good to and good for you?
Hmm.
If it is, we can easily work on that other stuff. But if the sex isn't even good, it's like, why are you doing all this outside work to get to something that's just meh anyway? So I think that when I consider sexual response, I differ from some of my counterparts in that I'm like, sex that's good to you has to be defined by you and not your partner. There can be some common ground, but if you don't know what sex is good to you, then it doesn't even make sense to try to work on the other parts because you're going to get back to something that doesn't reward you, doesn't feel like it's worth it.
So I think that's a really interesting point. And because again, we all have ideas about what sex is, and often they're very narrow. I really appreciate in the book that you give us examples of folks across the gender and sexual orientation spectrum. So we can see sex operating in different ways. You also have examples of asexuality and using that as like a community advisor and just kind of modeling things for just to, there's a, I'm getting too deep in
Yeah.
my thoughts and I'm getting lost. But I think the person that you expose us to who is asexual and how they kind of interweave that into tribal narratives and things like that. It's just so interesting. There's so many places to go. And I can't recommend the book enough. And something interesting and related is I recently worked for a nonprofit that is since closed due to funding. But one of the things that was really interesting in that space is I learned about this effort called ViVE and how they do like kind of Black led support for HIV education and stuff like that.
Yes.
And so often we think about discussions around STIs and things like that in a very stigmatized, don't do it or bad thing, don't have sex or bad things will happen to you. Like my favorite quote is Mean Girls when he's like, "You, if you have sex, you will get chlamydia and you will die." And it's one of my
Yeah,
favorite
I've
quotes.
heard that type of message, you know?
It's one of my favorite quotes in the whole world, and why this is relevant is because ViVE has, I'll send it to you, this, three-part series around as opposed to talking about the risk generally, exploring what you want from sex
Yes.
holistically, and so it, like, goes and breaks down, like, are you into kinky stuff? Are you into, like, anal? Like, it just kinda goes through all of these possibilities of what sex can look like, and because one of the questions I was going to ask you is when we have so few places to discuss sex as Black folks generally, and definitely as mothers, like, where do we even figure out what good sex is to us?
Mhm. I mean, that I like the way they break it down in a popular activity a lot of sex educators use. I think I share this in the book and in a number of places is that yes, no, maybe so list. It sounds like they have some Vive has some iteration of that where you have maybe a list of things you can check like, "Oh, I like that. Yeah, that sounds good to me." Or you create your own list where you write down all the stuff you like, all the stuff you don't like, and the stuff you're kind of like curious about or open to. And I use that for people because it gives them probably the first opportunity for a lot of the women that I'm working with, a chance to say, huh, oh, so you don't just mean penis and vagina intercourse? No, I don't. I mean a lot of things that sex can be. And so when they remember maybe that there are some sexual activities that after they went through all of the what we used to call bases and they got to home run status, they were like, okay, well, I guess I just have to stay here. But maybe you enjoyed some of the earlier bases and that was sex to you, right? Maybe you enjoyed just having a nipple play or breast play, and that's really your sex. And then the rest of the stuff is just like cool, but it doesn't do it for you. And I think a lot of women are in the age right now where we need to be giving ourselves permission to say what we mean when we say good sex.
Mm.
And it takes a lot of courage to do it because most of us have been socialized not to say what we want, especially as mothers, especially as Black mothers, because there's so many people who are keeping an extra eye out for us to be living up to respectability politics. And we're trying to release it day by day, even though we've been swimming in that same water.
Yep. Respectability politics through and through. The more I learn about Black motherhood, which I'll probably be learning about my entire life,
Right.
the more I learn about, like you said, just all of the different ways that Black women's sexuality has been policed by the state,
Hmm.
just between, like forced sterilizations
Exploited
and
and then police
also,
it. Like, what?
yes, just so many things. And it's funny because I think what's really interesting is even for myself, we think about these like big moments, Mississippi appendectomies, all of this kind of stuff, right? But the real trauma is also in the everyday.
Yes.
The way that we're like, don't wear a skirt that goes above your knees, or everybody's gonna think you're free play, or I better not hear about you talking to a boy after such and such a time, or we all know what's gonna happen there, or just all of these little moments where we're taught not to trust ourselves. It's so interesting. And I can remember being as young as maybe like third or fourth grade, and my hips came early
Mhm.
and hearing so many comments. Either it was some man saying something and making me feel uncomfortable, or it was a family member suggesting that I needed to be ashamed and cover those things up. And my mom and I have a pretty open relationship with the things we discuss. And also, she used to dress me in boys' husky pants
Mm,
because she was trying to hide the fact that I had hips. And I looked ridiculous
mhm.
because when you put husky pants on hips, you just got husky hips.
That's right.
And it doesn't change anything.
And I think we probably talked about this, but a lot of times there are women who understand patriarchy, but their interpretation of what to do about it
Mm.
puts the onus on the girl. And it's like, so cover yourself up. Or don't show your shape in this way. Speak this way. Don't be alone with them, as opposed to using our power, because we're more than half of the human population using our power to be like, this stops here. The consequence will be with the person who's perpetrating. You know what I mean? And that is
Yep.
the depth of how we've been swimming in patriarchy for so long, that we know the problem with it, but our solution sits with the person who is going to be impacted, not with the people who would perpetrate.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And it kind of makes me think about how looking at new interventions to give us like a liberated sexual experience and make sure all of us are free from like unwanted attention and all of these things, how it kind of takes like a world building mindset
Yeah.
because I know for kind of like you said, for my mom and everyone, they really did have the best interest in mind when they were like, well, I'm going to protect you. And it's like, well, you protected me, but you protected me at the cost of something.
Yes.
And you did what you could imagine at that moment, right? And so I really hear you saying that having some more creative solutions could be very useful. And also, something that I'm working on is understanding like sometimes people just gonna look at you because you're fine. You
Mhm.
know, like it's not even, we always go to, here's a predator. Maybe you just fine and people are gonna look, you know?
I've never been the type of person who necessarily minded. I
With the
would
hair flip.
right. I would on several occasions dress for that type of attention, and I did not mind. But I usually had somebody in mind I wanted the attention to go to. And so I think what gets complicated about the conversation is when people who you didn't want to be attended to by start showing that attention. Do we develop the skills to be like, hey, don't try that with me. I don't want that from you. Do we train people who have to face that rejection, because it is going to be a rejection with, "Oh, it's not about me. They don't want that from me, but it doesn't mean that I have to humiliate them or harm them. I just need to take that,
Hmm.
you know, it just, it's okay." And so I think that, yeah, there's nothing wrong with you fine and you just feel and fine to be fine.
Look, I'm sure you have this experience. Sometimes you walk your hips just doing a little extra. It's
Mhm.
just like, you know what? It's a day. I got to put a little extra in there. I definitely feel that. And so, kind of with that in mind, I kind of chatted with a few of my friends and I was like, what questions do y'all want me to ask? What's some of the questions y'all want to hear? And
Round table. How about that?
we do. We do have to do that. And one of the questions that my friend had, well, a few of them, but I've limited it. Obviously, you can't be here all day forever. But kind of to your point, one of my friends said, like, she often feels like she's split into parts: a mom, a wife, an advocate, a sexual being. How does she learn to integrate all of those parts without guilt?
That is something I'm thinking about more and more, talking about with my own therapist. Guilt is an emotion, and sometimes you have to feel the emotion and not use it as the thing that decides your action. And that's like the emotion comes from some place. And so my first thing is turning toward that emotion with tenderness, like, wow, based on what you've been through, it makes perfect sense why you would feel guilty, because you were punished for being perceived as selfish, or you were, told that this is the way a good girl or a good woman should be. So it makes sense that you're going to feel guilt. Maybe you carry it in your chest or your stomach. It's not fair, but it makes sense that you would feel it. So if you first turn toward it with compassion, but that you don't determine your actions based on it. So it's like, I'm going to have to take a weekend to myself to recover from, a really trying time. And I'll let my husband know and let the kids know and give them hugs. And maybe the baby's crying, like, Mommy, how dare you leave me? All the guilt is coming up. And it's like, is this the healthiest thing for me to do for myself so that I can come back and be fully present and well? I will have to leave with that guilt, hold that guilt with compassion, and still do the thing I need to do. So that's,
Mm,
I would say, for most of the people I know who deal with that level of guilt or some type of guilt in that way, you're probably making a decision that is very healthy for you. And if you know that to be true, then you approach your guilt with a lot of care, a lot of tenderness, a lot of compassion. So, how you talk back to your guilt, how you breathe through it, all of those things are skills and strategies like you can work on, but you got to do the thing that's causing the guilt anyway, if it's for your health and well being.
I really appreciate that. And one of the things it makes me think about, like with mom guilt generally, is I often kind of tell folks in my network that it's an opportunity to set some boundaries and that just as it's about us diving into what we deserve as folks, it's also often necessary training and support for the people who love us. Because as you said, rejection, delays, not getting what you want, like all of these things, they're natural parts of
Mhm.
being a human.
Mhm.
And if we don't, like, as the cliche we hear all the time is you can't pour from an empty cup.
That's right.
I think about all of those things, and kind of a related question to that is she's also wondering how she can rebuild a healthy relationship with sex when it's often tied to performance, validation, and escapism
For who? For
for
the
her.
person? For her. So, okay, the validation, escapism, and what was the 3rd one?
Performance.
And performance. So, to me, that means that they're still working through their commitment to elitism, right?
Mm,
Or this idea that there's a hierarchy of humans and that there's a way to get to the top of it. Usually, if we believe in, like, performance and perfectionism, and validation, it's because we wanna be seen as better than what we think we are. And there is no better than what you think you are. There's you. So
mm,
there's no better or worse version of you. There's no good and bad version of you. There's just you. And I think the way we think about something and practice something have to come together. So it's easy for me to be like, hey, you need to start affirming that you're inherently worthy, that there's nothing that can change that. You can't be better or more worthy than somebody else. You can't be less worthy than somebody else. Like you can affirm that, but you have to act in that too.
mm,
So that means that when you notice while you're having a sexual experience or while you're preparing for a sexual experience, those feelings of like performance to come up, sit with, okay, am I performing because I like to put on a show and that's enjoyable to me and that's a part of what makes me feel erotic? Or am I performing because I want this person to think that I'm a better sexual partner than any other sexual partner they've ever had?
mm.
And like you're getting into that, okay, I'm being competitive or I'm trying to set a benchmark for whatever reason. Where does that thing come from? So asking your partner, if your partner to join you in that process and be like reminding you that you don't have to perform, reminding you that you're valid and worthy of love and care and attention and all of those things without having to be a certain way. And then the escapism, I don't necessarily know what they're escaping from. So it would be more context dependent for me.
Okay.
Some things need departure. Some things need to be escaped, and so I'm
Wow.
a little bit more about that.
Yes, I feel that completely. So I have a side note question. And look, my neurodivergent brain shows up where it does. I really wanted to kind of have a flow, but whatever. We're here. So kind of thinking about that piece around her question around performance and like, oh, you want to be the best, like you want to give the best head they've ever experienced and all these other things. We have expressions like such and such a person has good pussy. What is
Mhm.
good pussy? How do you operationalize what good pussy is?
Yeah, and everybody got a different operationalize it, all right? Everybody got a different definition. So, what is it for you? And I think having women and Black mothers in particular self-define is like the season I'm in. It's like when you say good pussy, what is good to you? How do you know your pussy is hitting the way you want to be hitting for you? And then your partner may or may not agree, and can you be okay with that?
That's funny. Can you imagine like going to your partner? I have good pussy. It could be better. It's
Right.
mid pussy.
I've had better. Oh, okay. Well, that even the idea of better or worse, is already contributing to this hierarchy. Like you might have something that you enjoyed more, but better is relative.
It is. And when I talk to my husband, what seems to be pretty consistent is the difference between a good, a mid, or a bad experience is how present were you and how engaged were you in the process.
Mhm.
And that's so interesting to me how presence and active participation can make such a difference. But often, again, I think you say something, there's a comment I wrote down from the book somewhere, and you talked about how like sex has the benefit of relaxation
Mhm.
and like being able to rest and, like getting a good nap or whatever if you're one of those people. And I think the hard part is you can have the sex to relax, but you got to relax to have the sex.
Yeah. Some people don't have to relax to have the sex.
Oh, those people are
But,
lucky.
it's just a different season of life. I'm not in that season. I need to be relaxed. But I think there's something to be said about what you do during the full sexual experience that helps you relax. So it's like, is a foot rub, a leg rub, a thigh rub for 15 minutes a part of what relaxes you and a part of your sexual experience, or shoulder or scalp or whatever? Like, how much time do you really have to dedicate to it being the type of sexual experience that helps you feel relaxed before you go to whatever next level of the sexual experience there is. And a lot of times as parents, we don't really feel like we have that much time. Excuse me. So it's like, are you squeezing it in? And if you are, at what cost? A lot of people are squeezing it in just for frequency purposes, right? They're like,
Yeah.
I'm squeezing it in because I want to be able to do this 2, 3 times a week. And so we'll just get 15 minutes 2, 3 times a week. And that's fine if that works for you. But it could be maybe you're a once every week, once every other week person, but it's going to be a day,
Mm.
and it's going to be a high quality experience and one where you have elongated arousal and like somebody takes real care with you and you can take real care with them and the kids are away and all of these components. But it's not as often because you have to create space for that. I think we have to normalize that frequency can't be our only metric. Duration or the length of time of the sexual experience can't be our only metric. Quality, is it good to and for everybody involved has to really be that. And it's like, how is your partner defining good? How are you defining good? And then where, if any place, is there some common ground that y'all both could be like, yeah, well, if we can't have all these things, we both agree on this one. So let's make that thing really hit.
That makes a lot of sense. And I have so many things going through my head, but I'll keep them to myself.
No, go ahead.
I'm really just thinking about how every time there's a question, you kind of point us back to self exploration
Mhm.
and how it's just occurring how subjective so much of this is.
Yeah.
I'm even thinking of something like one of my other friends has a question about kink that I'll offer in a moment. But I'm even thinking about how, like, my new thing is Reddit, and I just want to know all the things on Reddit. And there's like sex information channels and like all this other things. And something I'm really interested in learning about, which is putting a lot of my business out there, but I don't care right now, is like consensual non consent, right?
Yeah.
And so thinking about how, we talked about being active and like what presence is and what arousal is, but for like folks within that channel, sometimes like being present and pretending not to be present is the thing that gets them. And so again, I'm just thinking about how it's so relative.
Yes, it is. That's why I said presence may not be the thing for everybody. And I get why it might be for someone and why it might not be for another. And I think about moms in particular, if you feel like many moms do, kind of overwhelmed with the emotional labor of it and the tasks and the day-to-day like anxieties that are sometimes carried with motherhood, it might be really nice to not have to be present and to feel like somebody is going to fully take care of you and you don't have to show up active and that you can just lay there and it be pleasurable, not lay there to get it over with. Lay there for it to be enjoyable, but not just to get it over with. And so I get why something like, and I think in one of the chapters I wrote about a couple who engaged in shibari because the mom was like, my body just ain't doing a lot right now. And she was like, I want to be tied up because then I know I can't do anything for anybody. And so for her, it was like, nah, tie me up. And then if the kid just happened to yell, it ain't on me because I'm already tied up.
Yeah. It's funny.
The same thing for maybe practices like consensual non-consent or stuff. It's like, I just want to lay there and be ravaged or taken over. I don't want to have to be responsible for how this goes at all because I feel responsible in so many areas of my life. So
Mm,
it makes sense. And I think it is super subjective. And that's why I'm really into helping people create their personalized sexual liberation menus, not trying to give them one of mine.
that makes complete sense. And I don't know if you already have, but you need to offer a workshop where we all just come together and we work on our sex menus together.
Next talk on Thursday, and hopefully when that comes out, people will have a blueprint for how they can go on through that
All
thing.
right.
I'm
Yes,
at it.
hopefully.
Marketing and like hosting a workshop. Somebody would have to host a workshop and just invite me to be the talent because all that
All
back end
right.
stuff, absolutely not.
Okay. Look, I'm gonna write that on my set of thoughts then.
Okay.
Um,
I'll pop through.
what was I'm trying to remember what I was about to ask. So something that's kind of coming to my head now, I'm thinking about like again, kink and like all of the different stuff folks want to explore. And before I ask a more practical question, I'm curious how often it is for us to hold kind of like residual trauma from having been called fast girls that we just like have really basic sex after because you're like, I was out here throwing it in a circle when I was a teen. I'm ashamed of that. And now I'm going to just be super vanilla, even though that's not necessarily what I want to do.
Mhm.
How do we reconcile our curiosity and desire for sexual exploration
Yeah.
with the trauma of someone else having kind of put us in a cage about what sex should look like, how frequently, whether or not we deserved it, and things like that?
Ooh, that's a good one. Okay, a lot of the work I'm doing right now on the research side is with couples. And I think couples are a really good like site of intervention for something like this. Because especially if you're in a long-term relationship that is like mostly monogamous and dyadic, like two people, you've got one person's feedback about that that's essential to that part of your liberation other than your own, and that's your partner. If your partner is on board and can show up as affirming of your sexual exploration, if they can do whatever interior work they need to do to be like, I want you to fully express all the things you're curious about because I'm with it. If you with it, if they can give that energy and not shame, like, oh, you want to try that? The minute a partner hits the, you want to try that, it just replicates all of those messages in such a like immediate, powerful way. But if they can give you a mirror to the liberation you're seeking, like, you want to try what? Say less, because I've been wanting to try that. What are you not going to do? So I think there's something to be said about the power. It doesn't matter the gender of your partner. It really is about like your partner's ability to be a liberation mirror with you. Because we
Mm,
don't heal in isolation, right? It really is solidarity with your sexual partner to be like, yo, this is what I've been dealing with, how I grew up, what I was on. If you have a partner who can be like, I'm with somebody who was fast, who, would have done X, Y, and Z, they're like, man, they feel some type of way about that, they're probably not a great person to explore that with until they do their own work about their own sense of inadequacy. But if they're like, well, I love that about you, because that means that you're curious and that means you're willing to try new things and we can try things together, that's a playground,
mm,
So I think that the partners really have to do some work too. It's not just on the moms. It really is on the partners to the moms, whoever they may be, whether it's the parent to their child, whether it's a new partner, whatever, to be like, yo, I'm on this journey with you, because they also likely have some things that they have been discreet about or not as open about because they're afraid of what you have to say or you judging them. So I think that judgment space between partners is mad toxic. But if there's a place for you guys to mirror liberation to each other, a lot of that can melt away in such a
mm,
beautiful way. Me and my husband had this conversation, I want to say maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, because he was like, I like to be the guy with the girl on my arm who, got the banging body out and doing all this. He's like, I don't mind that at all. And he was like, I like to feel like you're open and you can explore all of these things. And I was like, I don't feel like that was early you though. I feel like this is a different version of you. He's like, it is. He's like, that's me growing and dealing with my own insecurities. And I'm like, I love that for you. Thank you. And that also healed something in me, and helped me return to another part of myself. So I think that your partners can evolve. And if they're willing to, and you're willing to do that together, that's a great place to practice.
I appreciate that. It's a really good reflection. One of the other things that's kind of sitting in my mind as a curiosity is friend wanted to know. And I feel like that person who they're like, a friend wants to know, like, it's not me.
That's
I have these same curiosities, but this particular, like, I'm pretty transparent. So if I have a question, I'll be like, I want to know. But, so one of my friends was curious as we get more comfortable in sex and sexuality. Of course, one of the main roles that we play as mothers is transmitting messages about sex and sexuality to the next generation. And one of the things that came up, I kind of added a layer to it. The first layer is what is the pre work we need to do to make sure we're passing? You know where I'm going to
Mhm.
make sure we're passing good sexuality messages to the next generation, our kids or those we care for. And then the subcategory, she was just curious about general suggestions about when to dive in and what age appropriateness is.
Being a parent is such a good reflection point for how sexually liberated you really are. So there's like you as an individual expanding on your own sexual liberation journey, then is you as a partner to somebody expanding on your sexual liberation journey, you as a parent to somebody and you as like a family or community member. Parenting helps you reparent in a lot of ways, right? What are some things you were I start with what are some things you were judged for that really still stick with you, that really still Velcro to you? I would have the pre-work be writing those things out and honoring that by writing what you wish you would have been taught or what you wish you would have learned. And then looking for that type of information. So finding the research or sex educators who kind of teach to what you wish you would have known instead, that's a part of the healing that then you can give and pass down multi-generationally. Then asking your kids what they want to know. So opening the conversation about sex up as early as you possibly can in developmentally appropriate ways. For people, who have kids that are nonverbal or really early in age, it might just be naming their genitals with anatomically correct language. It might be saying who does and who does not get to touch them and in what way. But as your kids get language, like, oh, I noticed you were pee-peeing. Do you have questions about your penis? Do you have questions about your vulva? No, not right now. Kids will be straight up because they don't have no shit. No or yes. What? Where is your penis? Like I don't have one.
Yep,
But
I've gotten that.
so I think having them through their hygiene, you get to have those conversations through bath time, through diaper changes, through growing up, through buying new clothes. You get to have these developmentally appropriate conversations with kids about sex, about consent, about relationship dynamics, about power. And so having them, especially if you feel like it's going to be awkward, having them anyway. Like, it's okay. Mommy feels a little bit awkward about this, but that's because I'm growing and we're all growing together, and having those conversations anyway and reminding them they can ask you anything. And if you need to learn how to take a couple breaths before you respond, learn that because kids will ask you all kinds of stuff and you just have to pause, think about it. And if you don't know the answer, that's okay. Say that, oh, I don't know, but I got to go find out. Can I get back to you when I learn something? Because I want to learn too. And I think that makes a huge difference.
Yes, listening to you talking about this journey with chatting with our kids, it feels like a wonderful chance to shout out Melissa Carnegie. I think that's how her last name
Mhm.
is pronounced with Sex Positive Families. Um, and just seeing the work that they're doing in the world has been wonderful. I've had the pleasure of talking to them a few times. And so if folks are looking for more resources that are specifically like, here is how we are
Yes.
establishing the culture in the home, Sex Positive Families is an excellent resource. And I'll remember to
Mhm.
link that. And back to what you were saying with, we need to have that conversation, especially if we feel awkward. And let me tell you, I am great with anatomically correct language. I will penis and vulva you to death. That part where you said, ask them just broadly, a free for all, what their questions are, my heart sank straight through my stomach, out my butthole. Because it sounds terrifying. I don't have enough time to prepare and prep for what's going to be said if it's that open ended. And my children can ask some really interesting conversations and questions. And as you've probably seen, and that's a really good transition into like one of my kids, my youngest, my daughter, she was asking because like I was helping her learn like how to clean herself appropriately,
Mhm.
right? And how to like wipe and stuff in the bath and letting her take the lead in that. And so we started having conversations around like, well, what is the clitoris? Like, what is it for? All of those kinds of things. And knowing the language to express those things is so interesting, especially when you've never been offered it.
No.
And I don't just go around like using, if you've been, because my husband and I have been together for like 12 or 13 years.
Mhm.
And so, you don't have to use those kind of words. Like they kind of grab and go. It's just really interesting to have to put those words into practice and learning how to explain pleasure and do it within comfort, but also being honest is hard.
It is. It is. It's hard because we are still dealing with this idea that kids shouldn't have access to sexual pleasure. A lot of parents struggle with that. A lot of parents struggle with that because they're like, I don't want to introduce them to something too early. I don't want to harm them. I don't want to. And I get that. I get that fear and that feeling. But kids have touched their genitals already. So
Yeah,
they understand that sometimes touching their genitals can be pleasurable. And that's the way I would say it. Sometimes touching the clitoris can be pleasurable. Here are the things that we need to know about when you can do it and where you can't do it, and
Mm.
kind of leave it there. And then if they have more questions, go in the direction of their questions. But sometimes people have a really hard time with that because they don't believe kids deserve access to their own bodies in that way. Or
Yeah.
for religious or spiritual reasons, they don't want kids masturbating. And so they have to really work that part out.
There are so many layers there. And one of like kind of a thought that comes up hearing you say that is a lot of, how you were saying like you had precocious sexual experiences and how a lot of us intertwine early sexual experiences with trauma. And
Mm,
like, folks will say, oh, well, are children like interested in their genitals or masturbating because someone, brought that up or taught them that. And
mhm,
again, like you said, exploration is a natural thing. What it just I guess it just comes down to is doing your best to have an open dialogue
mm,
consistently through the stages, and it's hard and it's awkward. Like, there was a my so, like, most folks probably, we have, like, this box of, like, toys and, like, random stuff,
mm.
and then one day I forgot one of them on the floor, and I don't even know where my daughter got it from. She was like, "Does this go on your genitals?" And I'm like, "How do you know?" Just like, how did you figure that out?" Like,
And we
kind
don't
of,
know what needed they're exposed to, right? Because it's so they could have heard it from another kid, been shown something from another kid, or been the person showing people.
who knows? And hopefully not telling everyone at the school that mom has something for her genitals at home,
Yeah.
because that would be awful for me. So in those situations, because I know there are ways to approach things that are more child focused and more parent slash mother focused. And I'm always going the mother focused way. So like aside from the things that we need to do for our children, how do we not be overwhelmed and overcome with shame and embarrassment when our children see us as sexual beings?
Mhm. I think that to understand yourself as a sexual being is to know that you'll be seen as one. So if you are okay with yourself as a sexual being, then that means that that doesn't have to be compartmentalized through different roles. That doesn't mean that you showcase all aspects of that to your kids. And I think a lot of people go to the extreme of like, well, does it mean that you're going to just be having sex in front of your kids? It's like, why would you even go there? Why do we have to take it to here? It's like, no, but if they ask you a question and it's about sex and they want an honest answer, and it's like, yeah, mommy and daddy do have sex. That's something that we decided that we could have with each other. And it's because we're adults and we have this type of relationship. But if you want to know more about that, you can ask questions like this. I'll tell you some things and some things I won't tell you because they're private, just like certain things about your life are private, and that's okay to set those boundaries. You don't have to tell kids everything about everything, but you do have to let them know that there's nothing wrong with asking the question or being curious about it.
So I want to be mindful of your time, and I have two more questions for
Go
you.
ahead.
Okay. So, one question is again, thinking about all of these layers and identities and social forces and transitions, they bring up many questions, right? And some of which we may never know the answer to, some of which we'll kind of figure out as we continue to reflect and explore. What were the questions that you had top of mind when you were writing Good Sex?
The question that I sat with was, what is good sex? And I started the intro chapter with it and I ended the book returning to it. And as I wrote each chapter, I was like, this is just one possibility. And so by the end of it, like my first draft or my rough draft, I was like, these are all possibilities of good sex, but they don't make up the totality of good sex and they might not be everybody's definition. So that's why I was able to come up with a really solid and easy to remember sex that is good to and good for everybody involved. So there might be one person involved, there might be many people involved. It might feel good, but not be good for you. And so you need both. And then based on that, you can pick whatever sexual seasonings you want that make it good to and for you. Right. And I think that that question sticks with me because it is so subjective. It should be personalized and shame free. It isn't, though. And knowing that it isn't, I need to normalize a lot of language and a lot of ways of thinking and a lot of practices. So as I was working through each chapter and giving strategies, I was like, people will struggle with this one. Please expect this to take 6 months or, giving people realistic timelines. Cause I think a lot of books, they like to be like, try this and then ta-da. And I just know as a psychologist, that's not how human change works. And so letting people know you might struggle with this and have to put this down and pick it up in 6 months because now ain't the time. And that's okay too. I don't expect people to read the book chronologically because I know that certain chapters are going to be more relevant than some people than others at different times in their lives. And I think so. What is good and how do we get there? What is liberation and how do we get there? Those were the questions that stayed with me. They were kind of my buddies.
And that's perfect. Well, whatever you said would have been perfect because it was your journey and it got us this wonderful book. But it's also perfect because one of the questions that I wanted to ask you as this last formal question before I ask if there's anything you want to add was if you could have mothers only have one takeaway
Mhm.
from listening to you, what would you want them to gather about sex and liberation, excuse me, sex, motherhood and liberation?
Define good sex for yourself first. And it's perfectly normal if you are a whole ass mom and this is the first time you're doing it because most of us never get asked, but define it for yourself and sit and write it down. Don't just think about it. Write it down and then check in with yourself next year and see how it's changed because it could. And that's okay too. So
Mm.
defining it for yourself, I think, is the main way.
Well, this has been a beyond lovely chat. Is there anything else you would like to offer or say to folks? Any upcoming projects you want us to be looking out for other than making sure we go grab good sex,
Yeah.
both in the bed and at the bookstore?
Right. Right. And read it together with your partner. Share the book with people. I'm right now, I'm like in the vibe of multi-generational conversations and romantic partner conversations or sexual partner conversations. I think that defining it for yourself is really just the first two steps. And the other steps are how do you do this in partnership or community? So if you're not partnered, have a conversation with good sex with your homegirls. Talk to your friends about sex. Talk to your mama and your grandmom about what sex was and what good sex is to them. Like, start to break those generational silences around sex as grown women together. And I think,
Hmm.
those conversations are really important to me. And I'm trying to figure out a framework for how to do that, how to lead that. So if you do for real want to do like a conversation and host people, I really am down because I think it needs to be like many women together talking about this.
I am down. Look, we got to figure out logistics,
Mhm.
but it's something I'm interested in. And it feels divine because you're talking about intergenerational layers. And the question I didn't ask, because I was like, maybe I'll save it for part two, is what is the role of intergenerational relationships in sexual liberation? So I was like, that's going to sound kind of random. So I'm going to leave it alone, but I know it's important.
It's not. It really is spot on. It really is spot on. Because we
Man,
gotta be going up the generations and down the generations. So as
we
parents,
do.
who are responsible for the people we created, but the people who created us can learn from us too.
They can, because one of the things that, you were saying, like, have the conversation with your mom. My mom and I talk about a lot of things.
Mhm.
We don't really talk about sex. And I remember reading that you have an open communication with your mom about those kind of things and being like, man, I wish me and my mom talked about those things, except I do, but I don't because it's new. And it occurred to me that if I can't talk to my mom, I likely can't talk to my daughter
Mhm.
because that's the same dynamic, but
Dynamic.
flipped.
Mhm.
It's like, all right, I got to get it together because
Together. So you talk to both of them and then have the 3 of you, it might be at a different time in your daughter's life, but eventually, put it as a aspiration, like that there
okay.
a season where you 3 can talk together.
Look, that's a
It
long
should
time
not be this
aspiration.
year, you know what I mean? It might be 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
All right. All right. All right. Well, like I said, this has been lovely. We're going to connect about figuring out ways to extend this conversation because as we said, I think of all of the social pressures and stereotypes put on black women, this concept of the Jezebel being overly sexual, that shapes like probably 80% of our motherhood, you know?
Yes.
So if we can be sexually liberated, the rest of this shit's easy work. It's easy. Okay. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me, Dr. Candice.
Thanks. It was great talking to you.